Hello, YouTube. Hello, Brett. Hello, Christian.
Hey, Michael.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for being here. Looking forward to this podcast. So, yeah, let's just kick it off. Those of you out in the audience, please put out some questions for us if you have thoughts and feedback. Brett, Christian, welcome to Talk Python to me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. First
Christian,
time for me.
Yeah, Christian, it's great to have you here. That's super. And Brett, I think you may have been on before.
Memory recollects. Yes, I have been on it. I have been on.
I love having you on. It's always fun to talk about stuff. And it always seems like somehow we touch on WebAssembly. I think one of the very last conferences I went to was PyCon, and we recorded like on the expo floor talking about WebAssembly. So maybe we'll find a way to get back to that.
I do remember that conversation very distinctly, actually.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yep.
All right. Well, even though you've been on a lot, maybe just real quick, tell people about yourself. You've been Python core deving for a long time and something to do with VS Code and Python as well. So tell people about that.
Just stuff. Yeah. Just keep it short and sweet. I am the dev manager for the Python experience in VS Code at Microsoft. I've been a Python core developer for 19 years, and I've been a member of the Python Steering Council since its inception back 3 and some odd months ago, I think. I don't even keep track of when that started.
Yes.
And that's me.
Awesome. Christian, how about you? Tell people about yourself.
Hi, I'm Chris. So I work for Red Hat. You may have seen that. So
you have a Red Hat and you work for Red Hat. That's awesome.
Yeah, Red Fedora, by the way. So I work for Red Hat in security engineering department. I work on something that could be easiest described as a open source implementation of Active Directory. And currently working on just containerizing all the things and getting that up to the internet. So that's a fun one. As part of my security work, I also do security for CPython. So I take care of some of the models, and I'm part of the security response team. Been a core developer for I think 14 years, give or take, probably. A long time, eventually. So I started doing Python like 20 years ago. That was fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's anything else you want to know about me?
No, I would just like to say thank you on behalf of everyone for keeping our machines from getting rooted because we're running Python web apps. That's pretty awesome.
You're welcome.
Seriously though, how often are there meaningful security problems in CPython? I know that one of the big talking points about moving away from Python 2 was like, well, if you don't come along for the ride, you're not going to get security updates. But how often is that a big problem, really? Like, how often are there problems where a CVE is filed and you're like, oh, we got to jump on this and quickly
so
get it out
the last version of Python that came out before we had the emergent release for the bug fix, so the 3.10.2, I think, had like 11 or 13 CVEs, although only one that directly affected was in the Python code. So we also ship a bunch of extensions, like we ship a library to parse XML that had like 6 or 8 ZVEs. We had a zlib fix. We had something else. So it's not just Python core that's affected, but since we bundle and ship several libraries with CPython, you know, especially Windows and the Mac installers, you may be also affected. If you have Linux distros, they typically have their libraries debundled and use system libraries, and they update them out of bounds. But yeah.
Okay. Well, that's actually more than I realized, to be honest. But you don't hear too often about it being a big public problem like, you know, Log4j or something like that.
Yeah, I'd say typically the CVEs we end up dealing with is the bundling that Christian mentioned, right? Like Christian does a lot of work to make sure we're constantly compatible with the newest versions of OpenSSL. So for instance, on 2.7, had you not moved over, you're going to have to do the work to be able to use OpenSSL. I think 3 is the newest one, one coming out. So that's the real kind of concern, and less of we screwed up as core devs and we have a nasty CVE. Is usually something we depend on, like typically triggers this kind of thing.
I see.
Thank goodness.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of the standard library and stuff, let's start out by talking about Python just on GitHub, because I think maybe the time yours releases, it might be already a week old. But Brett, you were one of the big proponents of moving CPython and the Python organization over to GitHub, right?
Yeah, I drove that move.
Thank you. That's awesome. It's so nice to be over there, but one of the challenges has been that bugs.python.org has kind of been its own island, especially since this move, right?
Yeah, so when I helped move us off of Mercurial to Git and thus move us to GitHub for pull requests and stuff, I basically had to choose my battles. And the battle I chose was changing our version control system and no longer self-hosting our version control system. I was not up mentally to the challenge of also trying to move the development team over to a new issue tracker as well. So I purposely punted on that problem and tackled the one I thought I was capable of handling and dealing with. And that's why we end up with this somewhat split personality problem of Python being on GitHub for pull requests and for code hosting, but not for issue tracking.
Well, Guido said yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday on Twitter that, hey, it's happening. The bugs python.org's migrating over, and then it got delayed until April 1st. So hopefully that happens really soon. But what was really surprising to me was just how long that migration is, right? It's not like a copy the files over, git init, git commit, or the equivalent of the for the issues. It's days to migrate all the issues.
Yeah, so there's tricky parts to this. I mean, one is we're getting internal help from GitHub, but obviously it's not common to move issue trackers into GitHub per se. Like a lot of projects I think just start on GitHub and have for like a decade. So the idea of moving over is kind of a new thing. And on top of it, not very many projects have the volume of issues historically to move over that we have, right? Like,
yeah,
we have like 7,000 open issues, I think, alone. So the volume there also kind of causes an extra overload. And because GitHub, as I said, they have some internal tooling for this, but it's not like something that they work on month over month. It's there and we're using it, but it's not optimized because it's just not a typical business concern, which I mean, totally makes sense, right? How often do you have a project of our size and age wanting to migrate over like this?
Yeah,
I think yeah, go ahead.
Just pulled the numbers. So we have almost 59,000 bugs in total on the bug tracker.
Yeah.
And almost 8,000 open. Yeah, 7,000 some hundred.
Yeah, and trying to translate over as much metadata as possible is computationally expensive, right? Because what we have to do is we have to generate a dump, and then the dump has
a different data model, right?
And it's a different data model on top of it, correct? So, for instance, one of the reasons this took so long was we had to first decide we wanted to do this, convince people that we should do it, find someone, it was Etso Malade initially, to come in and kind of figure out how to map things and get things working. And then earlier this year, we had Wukash step in and help out, as well as the developer in residence, to help push this over the finish line. And on top of all that, having to process all that data, export it to the right format, and then have GitHub's tools pull it in and not cause a strain on their system. Because, I mean, this is a lot of data to suddenly dump in and have to replicate across their entire cluster, right? So there's a reason why it takes so long. And we also don't want to have it happen because we're probably going to be run at a low process priority, which also means if we want to do it like on a Friday in the afternoon so that it's over the weekend and not when GitHub gets hit the hardest. So there's a lot of coordination going on. And as we all know, GitHub had some stability issues the other week. And so they just said, can we just wait till a little later to make sure that it's all good and solid and everything looks good. So the plan is April 1st.
Excellent. Very exciting.
Yeah. And we also have
go ahead. Christian, what do you think about this?
A good track count actually break GitHub. I'm not sure if anybody attended the live stream. Pablo's changed the master branch to main branch to rename the default branch. But yeah, we broke GitHub, and it took a while to recover from that too. So since our repos are so gigantic, so we started with ZVS, then moved to SVN Subversion, then went migrated all this stuff to Mercurial, and then to Git. And I'm not sure how many revisions we have in the tip, but it's gigantic.
Yeah. So just to be ultra clear here, thanks to GitHub for working with us directly. And actually, they donated money to help us make this all happen. So like they've been really great partners in all this. Thanks to Ezio for getting this started, Marietta for the initial pep, by the way, and even starting this conversation, and for Wukash to stepping in and helping get it finished.
Definitely a team.
A lot of people involved, and thanks to all of them.
So Tushar out in the audience is joking. Is this why GitHub has been crashing the whole week? But Christian, you were joking. Like maybe is this actually? Did you guys actually cause problems?
Not that I know of specifically, but I also, yeah, not that I know of.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope not. I apologize to the world if we did somehow.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time. There's been other outages and other crazy things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, at our size, we would not be the first time.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a huge DDoS attack not too long ago. Anyway, also Kim out in the audience asks, assuming there are usernames and email addresses on the original issue. So like, how much did you all care about having fidelity across those? And, this could have been an opportunity to just say, you know, what's awesome? Command A archive in your inbox to just kind of catch up and be okay. Like you could have just dropped it and said, we're just going to start over. And if it's important, it'll find its way here. And if it's not, then it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, there has been talk about this. There's varying opinions on how important the digital archives are. Like, do we need to move all the closed issues over? Should we only move open? Like we actually discussed this when we were looking at potentially up to a week to do the migration versus the 2 or 3 days it's actually going to take now. But everyone has different opinions of how important the history is. To specifically answer the question though, from the audience about usernames, as long as you have your GitHub username attached to your bugs.python.org account, that should map over.
And you've got April 1st to get it in there.
Yeah, I don't remember if we map email to email. There might be some privacy issues. I can't remember where that all landed. Like lawyers were consulted, and I was out of the loop on those. But I believe if you at least have specified your GitHub username on bugs.python.org, we will be able to do the map.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you both for the update on that. It's not exactly why we're here, but it's so timely, and I think you're both involved in it and stuff like that. So quite cool to see it coming along. I personally really think that it's fantastic that CPython is on GitHub. I know it's not that different if it was, say, self-hosted Git or GitLab or even Mercurial or SVN, but there's just something about it. It seems more open to contributors given just sort of the status of GitHub, where a lot of people seem to hang out and the whole PR flow and those kinds of things.
That was part of the motivation. Somewhat ironically, we actually had to teach a bunch of core devs how to use GitHub as part of the migration. Because, I mean, to be fair, some decent chunk of the core devs don't contribute to other open source. I mean, Python alone is a big enough of a project that it absorbs a large chunk of your time. So they just didn't have to know how to do any other open source development for a different project other than however Python did it. And if we weren't on GitHub, they just didn't have a need to. So, plus we also did the move a while ago. So I think it's coming close to a decade at this point. So it was also a different time.
Indeed. All right. So let's start by maybe talking about, speaking of different times, let's talk about the standard library from, maybe you guys could approach it from a historical perspective to start, because we're going to focus on stuff that's in there that maybe should be removed and the benefits of taking it out and stuff. But when it got put in, it seemed like a good idea. So when I think about Python, one of the key phrases I hear, I don't know its origin, but the batteries included story, right? Python comes with batteries included, and then its frameworks did like Django and so on. And it's a huge selling point, right? This is a language that has a bunch of support built in, right?
Yeah. So the rough history, for those who don't know, Python went public February of 1991, right? So 32 years ago. It's predates Linux, right? Like, it's really crazy when you look at the history of when projects came out, how long Python's been around. But the other thing to think about is who was on the internet or the World Wide Web even in 1991? Like, who even had like internet or even a modem back then? And so what that led to was people contributing things to Python that Guido would look at and go, oh yeah, that's useful. And then just pull it in and put it in the standard library. And it grew and grew and grew. Yeah. And then at some point in the 90s, like, there was a website called the Vaults of Parnassus, which had animated GIFs of wall sconces with little candles with the flickering, whatever, like total 8-bit. Like you can imagine what this is like. This is back in GeoCities days, right? And that's where you went to get your code. And all it was zip files of Python code. There's no concept of wheels or conda packages or anything like this. They were literally just zip files of code that you just unpacked and just copied over the directory that contained the other Python code, and you just vendored everything. There was nothing else. And so
and moving stuff around the internet was slow as well back then. I mean, a lot of people were on dial-up.
Yeah.
Internet made
you were blazing fast with your 56K modem if you were lucky enough to have that, right? Like, so that meant that it was really hard to find high quality code out there, right? And getting done and put up and all that. So things just kept getting added and added to the standard library, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and continued to be useful. And it was just a different time, right? Like, hell, not even if everyone on the internet even had a web browser, right? Like I remember when I first got on the internet.
Didn't Mosaic come out in 93?
Yeah, and actually one of the very first graphical web browsers was Grail, written by Guido in Python, right? Like if you go look up the history, right, it was like, I think Guido missed being the first graphical browser by like months or something crazy. There's a weird history in Python in terms of early web. But what this all led to, right? Like, and I remember, by the way, when I first got on the internet, it was Usenet and Gopher. It wasn't even the World Wide Web, right? That was still AOL days back then. For those of you
Telnet,
who can date yourself
Gopher,
based on that knowledge.
It
was a different time.
It was a bit of a sidebar. Like things were so basic back then, but at the same time, there was so much like imagination for what could be. I think because so much of it was unmaterialized, and you're like, I can see where this is going to go.
Yeah, internet was even much more expensive in Germany. So I know that so I was lucky. I went to university in 2000, but before, when I was living with my parents, I had to pay the internet by the minute. Local calls were not free in Germany. You had to pay for them. And I know that like end of 99, I was lucky. I paid like several hundred a month to have like a free, like a persistent internet connection, really persistent. But I used the only phone line we had, but I didn't have to pay by the minute, but I paid like in bulk.
Right.
It's super expensive. That's why lots of people. So I started actually using mailboxes. So I'll dial in mailboxes, and we had like this weird concept that you were sending messages, you push the message, and late at night, the mailboxes will call other mailboxes. They do this Unix to Unix copy to copy the messages around. And next day, you would receive the message from a friend who was living like in a different city.
Yeah, I remember that was amazing. Like all the backends that would just kind of sync up. It was like sort of this distributed, like the BBS world and some of the other stuff. Yeah, incredible.
So it made a lot of sense back in the days to have all the useful bits and pieces in Python. So that's why the internet library was so big. And so we have just Python code, it was easy, but we also have like lots of C code and C extension, and these were really complicated to compile and build. So you had to like make files and figure out which compilers and libraries you need, and building things for Windows was super painful for the Windows people, that they had to get the right compiler version.
They had to figure out their VC vars bat setup.
Yeah, and each Python version had like its requirements for different like Visual Studio versions. And
yeah, so I think that's, people get a sense of the time, right? Like at that time, it was amazing for Python to say, as much as we can get into the standard library, it's going to be a benefit to people, because if you need to parse CSS, color codes, hex color codes, and it's built in, that's a bonus, right? There's not the idea of pip and fast internet and all those things, right?
Or even distutils, right? Like as Christian was saying, compilation was hard enough as it is. So getting something in the standard library and ported over to C code for performance was a huge deal. So it's not even just distribution. It was literally just creating these things. It was difficult.
Sure.
So it just shows it how far we've come, right? That these were even problems that we used to have.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Do you think if Python were designed today, from scratch, this is the language we want, it would be packaged in the same way that it is now? Like, would it have a large standard library?
No, but that would be controversial.
I agree with Brett. Yeah.
Yeah,
Would
which
just all
is
be
why,
written in
why we're
WebAssembly?
friends and why we wrote this pet that we're going to be talking about.
Exactly.
Oh, we are friends. Thank you.
Oh, we're not. Oh, we went to a movie together at one of the PyCons in Portland, man.
Yeah. And we are friends on Nintendo Network.
Yes, on Switch. Yes. Yeah. But no, so I don't think so. Like, if you look at more recent languages like Rust and Go and stuff, they have a much more targeted standard library. They're able to lean on the community, and people seem fine with it. And I think that's a key thing is we get to learn people have gotten to learn lessons from us, but we also can learn. We would have been able, if we started now, to learn lessons from other people. And I think that'd be one of them is targeted standard library that is very tight and very targeted, very performant, very stable, and that's much easier to maintain would probably be the good way to go, because it makes getting yourself up and going a lot easier versus, oh, this isn't useful until I have this huge standard library, which as a burgeoning project would have been really difficult because you got to build a lot of code to make that happen. Right.
Absolutely. I do value having it there, though. At the same time, I understand why it would be smaller. I just think there would be some use cases that it would be less of an obvious choice to use Python. Like, for example, if I just want to script something on my computer, knowing that it has Python means it has all these libraries, where as opposed to if you've got to start installing dependencies just to get your sort of automation scripts to run, like there's this bootstrapping stuff that has to happen.
Yeah, from a philosophical perspective, we actually don't have a definition of what the standard library is, right? There's no PEP, there is no guidance over what the standard library is now meant for, what it should or shouldn't have. It simply doesn't exist. It's always been previously based on Guido's opinion, somewhat, and then now that's the Steering Council, it's somewhat based on just kind of consensus on the dev team, and that's kind of what the Steering Council will approve, more or less. But there is no guidance, right? Like, should we make it so that as you said, that simple automation script for managing your computer, should that have enough in the standard library to make that happen? Should we be able to have a simple HTTP server?
Right.
I don't know. Should we have tkinter? Right? Where's the line? And we don't have an answer right now. There is a discussion going on right now, actually over on Python Dev, discussing this kind of thing, because there was a proposal to potentially rip out URLlib. I think it was partially done by Victor Sinner to kind of not get a riot out of people, but to kind of spark a conversation.
Right.
And some people are going like, okay, URLlib was written back in the day when OSs did not necessarily ship with the network stack, right? And when we could plug into. Would it be better to actually rely on the OS, right? Do we really have to have all of that code in there just to parse things and figure things out to make the right HTTP request versus just going to Mac OS or going to Windows or using curl on Linux or any Unix platform, really, and just have it handle the request? I don't know. But I mean, this is the kind of question we're getting into now, and we'll probably get to. I mean, we can talk about it later. I have one of my infamous Brett's grand plan things around the standard library, and this all ties into actually funneling into making that decision of what do we want the standard library to be, so we have better guidance for ourselves as to where it should go, and thus what should or should not be in the standard library. Now, not to spook people, I don't know if this means we never deprecate anything that doesn't follow this policy that's in there now, but I would like to, at least as a core dev, know what we want it to be for today, compared to the cheap shipment model of useful Python code on the internet, pre-internet.
Right.
Yeah. So, and Michael, you already asked me about security bugs, and so Victor's proposal, Victor's thread on Python Dev, sparked by a discussion I had with Victor on our internal communication channels, where I pointed out that URLlib's actually a place where we have lots of security bugs. And even in very trivial things, like turns out like parsing like in URL, so something like splitting up the protocol, the host, the path name, the suffix. This is not trivial. And the way how our internal like parser works, it's written for a more forgiving and more open world. But people also use the routines, the like URL open, URL parse to verify and validate potential hostile requests that sometimes fails because we are too open, we are too nice. So this was one of the other reasons why the discussion sparked. And it's also a bit related to WebAssembly, but I think we can postpone that for later. But there is an interesting interaction with how WebAssembly or the WebAssembly runtimes environments work and what's not going to work with URLib.
Yeah, and the WebAssembly discussion also comes back to what Brett was talking about for sure just a minute ago. So defining what is the standard library. So I do want to come back as well to that later, but let's talk about your PEP. Which one of you wants to introduce PEP 594, removing dead batteries from the Python standard library?
Well, Christian's the original author. I just PM'd it to the finish line, so I'll let Christian.
Yeah, I ran out of steam and Brett just pushed it. Helped me to push it over the finish line.
Yeah, so what's the idea here?
The idea here is to remove things that are, in our like personal opinion, and maybe with some reasoning, no longer like super required in the modern world. So there are especially some parts that cost us lots of time and energy. The most relevant library for that is like NNTPlib. So the library to interact with news servers. We got your like
Usenet?
Usenet, yeah.
Yeah.
Usenet. So since we don't have a server implementation of NNTP, so the use standard, only the client libraries, we need to use like actual news servers for testing. So we need to connect to some servers and do some testing. These servers are no longer like stable. So we used to use libraries like sites like Gmain a lot, or one French news server that was stable, but they're sometimes don't work like we expected to work. They're sometimes just not available, or they network connection fail, or we get like issues with TLS connections. And these issues we're having blocked our whole CI chain. So when you do pull request, you run your test against Windows and Linux on x64 and on also macOS. So like for platforms. But once your pull request is merged, it also kicks off the whole buildbot farm. There are like 20, 30, 40 different platforms that run the tests post-commit. And anytime one of the NNTP servers had a hiccup, we had like false alarms and like indicating problems somewhere, which were not problems with the code or with the test, but rather with the infrastructure that was failing. And it was one of the motivations why I wanted to remove NNTPlib.
Sure. And how often are people depending on that these days? 1, 2, who's maintaining it? There's a really interesting list you all have of like, these are the things we want to consider to remove. There is somebody who understands and maintains it now. A lot of them have a no for that, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's the other aspect of this, right? It was things that were failing our test suite because the thing we had to rely on just wasn't stable enough or available. But our other parts were just simply no one wanted to step forward and say, I will make sure that this keeps working in modern versions of Python and compiler errors are dealt with, and I will deal with any feature requests and bug reports and all that, right? Because the standard library before this PEP had numerically more modules than there are countries in the world, right? Like the standard library is that vast. And I don't even remember if I even delved into sub modules of packages. Like I think literally the top level namespace is that big. So there is an aspect here of maintainability, of just simply there are only so many core devs to handle the influx. Hence why we have 1,600 pull requests that are currently open. And at some point you just have to kind of stop and go like, okay, who is benefiting from us carrying this forward, and how much of a detriment is it to the project to keep it going.
Yeah.
And some of these things, it was just a question of, right, is this useful enough to the world for us to put the effort into maintaining it, and having to make a call on some of them. And sometimes no one stepped forward, and sometimes some people very much stepped forward and said, I totally rely on this. And then it became a question, is like, okay, is it just you that needs it, or is it a large or decent enough sized chunk of the community that still needed it, that it warranted keeping it around and continuing to support
Sure.
it? Because I did a number crunch the other day of certain subdirectories in the Git repo. And if you look at just straight code between the standard library and the interpreter, 60% of that is standard library.
Wow.
Yeah.
How much does it influence your feeling and opinion about something, whether it has some C component or if it's just pure Python? Is it easier to keep a pure Python thing around that just is sort of higher level, doesn't require as much nuance, or does it not really matter?
At least for this PEP, I don't think we really took that view specifically. It's the management is more just a side effect almost, but this was mainly about, as the title puts it, dead batteries. So when Christian brought this list up initially, it was, I don't think these are useful in modern times, less than, oh, well, this is also written in extension modules, which makes it harder to maintain, because you can't just ask an average Python developer to come in and help maintain it. You have to ask someone who knows Python and C extension modules to come in and help maintain it. That was never the motivation directly.
Okay. Yeah. But knowing cross-platform networking code in C is technically, I would say, harder than knowing standard Python.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's first talk about the status. So accepted. All right. So this is happening.
Yeah. The first PR to document the modules being removed got committed last week. And I now you all get to see the curtain pulled behind how Python is developed. I'm going to publicly ask Christian to review my PR to deprecate AIFC. I know he's busy, so. But the first PR to actually, maybe he reviewed it before the podcast. I don't know. But the first PR to actually deprecate AIFC, the first module in alphabetical order, is now up. So I'll just be cranking through them until beta.
I feel like I saw in the release notes here that the Python 3.10.4 was out, and this has deprecate various modules according to this PEP. Is that right?
Yeah. So the steering council made the decision that it was useful enough to backport the documentation deprecation. So Python 3.11, obviously, because that's going to raise a deprecation warning. But 3.10 and 3.9 also document that these modules are deprecated, because we didn't want people coming in a company where they're on 3.9 at the moment, start using these modules, and then be surprised in 2 years' time or what have you when they upgrade to 3.11 or later, and suddenly, this thing I've been using is suddenly deprecated.
Oh, this went back farther than 3.10, huh?
Mm-hmm. Because 3.9 is still accepting bug fixes.
Got it.
So that's what that means. It's purely documentation. The code is not changed at all. It is literally just, if you go to the module index or any of these modules, it will just have a big deprecated term on it.
Quick bit of nomenclature, real-time follow-up. Mr. Hypermagnetic says, what is pure Python if not C Python? Christian, you want to sort of disambiguate the C Python from Python that has C?
So in Python, Python standard library, we have models that don't have like dedicated C model that just written in Python code. There are other models that have a mandatory backend in C. Like if you look at the SSL model, which I maintain, so the bindings to OpenSSL written in C, and the public-facing SSL model is FS8 and adds on top of the C backend, and this we would consider as a non-pure Python package because it requires C code. There are also other models. We had a
lot of the data structures like list and so on, right?
Yes, all the core data types are written in C.
Yeah,
but they are present always. So we're just talking about like things you would import and use.
Got it. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, then we have accelerator modules as well, like datetime, where they're implemented twice, once in pure Python and once in C. So like PyPy will use the pure Python version, or any platforms that can't compile the C code for whatever reason. And then there's the full C version for performance. So
Yeah,
pure
right.
Python basically just means the entire chunk of code for that module that you import is written only in Python code. There's no C code involved directly. Obviously,
Got it.
what you import could transiently cause that, but
For sure. So
Yeah,
Christian, what's the idea? Are we just going to just when 3.11 comes out, all the modules are just yanked?
330. So
No,
at
no.
3.11 they will.
What's the plan here? It's not so so immediate or so abrupt, is it?
No, it's going to take a couple of years. So, and 3.11, you'll get like the deprecation warnings, which I think that's a plan, Brad, to just emit deprecation warnings. So if you would import a model and have the warnings model enabled to show you deprecation warnings, then you would get a warning pop up. You could even in your CI turn the deprecation warnings into deprecation exceptions. So into a hard failure, and then your CI would fail and inform you that you're importing something deprecated. And this will continue in 3.12 and 3.13. The models are gone.
Right. Okay. So that's over basically a
2
more or
years.
less 2-year period because 3.11 is pretty imminent, right?
October.
Yeah.
October. So 3.13 would be October 2024.
Yeah. Sounds far off now. I'm sure it's not in practice.
Yeah, and to be clear, if for some reason the community really spoke up very vocally across a large swath of people, we might consider postponing. I don't think there's anything here we would not yank, but if people need for some reason more time to move, we might consider holding off. But we're fairly confident that most of these aren't. And already, honestly, the ones that people really care about are already getting copied and put onto PyPI. So people can totally still get the original code. And to be very clear, you're already using code from Python, which means you're already using the Python license, the PSF license for this code. So copy and pasting this code is totally fine, and we encourage it if you need this code, right? Like, because it's deprecated, it's not really good. It's not going to be changing. Like, unless it flat out breaks because of some change in Python that requires an update, this code is more or less, after this deprecation lands, that code's not getting touched, which means you could totally copy what's in there just prior to the deprecation or what's in 3.10, honestly, because once again, these modules aren't really being updated.
These are the ones that are being basically ignored and just dragging along anyway, right?
Exactly. So you could totally go in, copy the code over into your own code base, paste it in, save it under the exact same name, and it should more or less keep working the same way.
So
You'll obviously have to maintain it, but
yeah. So there's kind of two paths forward for people who are like, no, I really need AIFC audio file parsing or whatever that is.
Yep.
One, somebody might decide it's really important and they want the CPython version as a pip installable thing that you can then add back into Python with a dependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
That could be a possibility.
Yep.
Or as you just described, you'd vendor it, which means just copy the file and you just have a copy of the source code internally, and it's just part of your app now.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, and IFC has an interesting backstory. So when I posted my first draft of the PEP, I got contacted by a lead technical director from DreamWorks Animation Studios because they wanted to keep the model in CPython. So Python is heavily used in the movie industry. So if you see any blockbuster, it's probably powered by Python internally. Even so far that Python just won a special prize for the Animation Awards, the Annies, what they're called.
That's right. And Guido got that award, right? Basically
Guido got the physical award, and some core devs, including Christian, got requested certificates, and I believe Christian's got
that's fantastic.
Yes, the iWorks award. That's the second guy who invented Mickey Mouse, for example. So iWorks and Walt Disney invented Mickey Mouse together.
Fantastic. That's a cool honor, and probably an unexpected one from working on Python. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Christian and I have been doing this long enough that I think I've mentioned this on the podcast. When I first got involved as a core dev with Python, I still had to explain to people what Python even was, right? Or if I was lucky enough they knew what it was, they just would go, "Is that the language where white space matters?" Right?
Yeah. Is that the one that's weird?
Yeah. So it was a totally different time, and now we're being used to help power helicopters, help plan flight paths for helicopters on Mars, and handling the video of the lander that made that helicopter take off, and processing images of black holes and gravitational waves.
I just had
your JWST episode that I haven't gotten to listen to. Yeah, it's nuts. So no, I never thought any of this would ever happen. So yeah, having Blockbuster Movies have their entire management pipeline for their assets written in Python, it's always mind-boggling where Python is and what it's powering. I mean,
that's cool.
It's not just your cat videos and photos on Instagram anymore, or it's videos on
both,
YouTube.
Yeah, it's both amazing and par for the course. Yeah.
But I can't believe I just said it's not just Instagram and YouTube anymore. We've also been there long enough that people realize we power huge websites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just lots of stuff in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's YouTube constantly.
Yeah, YouTube was originally written in Python. I think it's still lots of parts of YouTube are powered by Python.
From my understanding.
Last time I spoke with someone there, it was, yeah.
Yep.
Sydney out in the audience has an interesting question. So there's a list of things that are deprecated here. Some that were threatened but kept. They were on the list, and then they're just maybe not. Sydney asks, might there be further removals in the future?
Maybe. So here's the deal. This PEP was done because Christian, right? I personally think rightfully so, thought we needed to do a bit of house cleaning and get rid of some stuff that was just kind of just sitting there rotting in the corner and not being loved. Some things got kept because to keep the controversy low, Christian was very conservative with the list. And basically, if anyone stepped forward and saying, no, please don't take that out, that was a core dev, it more or less just got left. Right. Very few things are on this list that people still pushed back and said we're removing, even if core dev wanted to keep it. That being said, as I said this earlier in this podcast, right, Brett's crazy grand plan here was to help Christian get this PEP done, get initial clean done. I've started a conversation over on Python committers about how to maintain the standard library, right? What does it take to add a module and to remove a module? Because that's actually not very clearly stated either. And it's been very just kind of open, right?
From my perspective from the outside of what defines the standard module is just, it's write only, stuff only gets added, and it's defined to be what's in the shipping version of Python, right? I mean, that's kind of an implicit definition.
Right, but how do you get something in there? Right? Did you know that GraphLib was added by a couple core devs just because they thought it was a good idea?
Yeah.
It wasn't, no one asked the string counts or anything, right? That's how it's been historically maintained.
Right.
It's very much just an open thing. And there's a proposal to kind of make it a bit more structured, and you could argue more rigid, depending on your view of this whole process.
More modern, maybe.
Maybe by suggesting that you need a PEP to add something because it's a shared cost to all the core devs that we have to maintain it. You'll notice I have a slight theme here of maintenance cost. Or
I have a puppy for you.
One that's fluffy or one that I'm going to have to pay vet bills for.
It might ruin your carpet, but it's also cute, so you'll like it.
Yeah, I've got a cat. I'm good.
So if you don't know these, you don't understand the joke. So just watch Brett's keynote from PyCon 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's 2019, maybe.
It was the first one in Cleveland, whichever one that one is.
2018, I think.
Yeah, I think it's 18.
Yeah.
Anyway, once that's settled, my hope is, once again, come up with a policy of what that means for the standard library. Once we have that policy, there will probably be a discussion about what does that mean for the current standard library. Do we leave it as is? Do we maybe slowly transition over or not? I don't know. Some people like Wukash, for instance, have advocated never removing anything from the standard library ever again. And literally just saying, this is deprecated. We will never touch it or update it. It's dead, but it's sitting here so we don't break the code. Other people are way more, let's strip it to its bones. And if you need this stuff, we'll make it as a separate package or something. Some people have talked about keeping it as is, but separating the development process. So it's actually an externally maintained thing and it has its own release process and schedule and all that. The answer is I don't know, but this is not the first time I've deprecated modules and had them removed. I was also in a competition with Fred Drake back in the 2 to 3 transition to see who could remove the most number of lines of code in Python, and I won thanks to removing the compiler package. So I have been around long enough to say probably, I just don't know when. Just because I will never say never when it comes to a project that's 32 years old.
Yeah.
But there are no specific plans right now outside of this PEP of deprecating or removing anything else from the standard library. So if that's the question, concretely, no plans. But philosophically, I am not willing to say
never say never. Yeah.
You know.
So one of the things that stands out. Let's talk about the modules real quick. Then I want to kind of talk a broader thing because I think it's going to lead us down a path. So maybe just give us a quick overview of the highlights, let's say, of things being removed. You know, I talked about this table here. It's under the deprecated modules heading on the PEP, and it has the module name, when it's deprecated. Some of them are like deprecated in 3.6, when it's to be removed, when it was added, whether as a maintainer. And interestingly, I thought this was cool. There's an alternative that's newer, better, and maintained that you could just use, right?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, and if you look at the table, you'll know some of the stuff's actually been somewhat documented as deprecated all the way back to Python 2.0 or 3, right? Like, you also have to understand some of the stuff got documented as don't use anymore a long time ago. We just didn't take the code out, and this is more of a push to actually finally remove the code in the documentation.
I see.
But yeah, so we have AIFC, which I believe is the audio format.
Correct. Yeah.
We have async chat and async core, which were very early async server things in the standard library that you shouldn't use, obviously, because it's on this list.
Yeah. An alternative is async IO, which was added in 3.4 and is active.
Yeah, it's actually asynchronous.
I think the async check, async core were added for Zope back in the days. I know that the Zope server used to use async core, async check a lot.
No. I mean, I don't even remember what the hell audio op is.
Audio op is low level like conversion and math operations used by IFC Wave and some of the other other sound models. So this just provides math primitives in C.
CGI is literally what it sounds like. It's helpers to write CGI scripts. Like,
that sounded like one of the bigger, harder to work with ones. Like, there's no maintainer. It was designed at a different time.
Yeah, and the funny thing though is a lot of packages still use bits of it because there's weird little helpers in there. But if you also go look in what the helpers are doing, most of them are either a one-liner or they delegate to something else somewhere else in the standard library at this point. And they have horrible APIs now because they very much expect it to be CGI. So they're reading from like environment variables and files to get the things to process versus passing them as an argument. So
from STD in, STD out. So yeah, pretty much hardcode STD in, STD out. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was actual pushback on CGI, but I think when we pointed out like this just delegates to here, or this is literally a one-liner that I can paste in on when you're in the discussion of what it does, like just copy and paste this regex literally, and or just whatever. Most people I think were okay with it. This was actually I think one of the first modules to get put up on PyPI like a couple weeks ago. CGI TB is tracebacks, pretty tracebacks in your CGI code. I mean, if you don't have CGI code,
yeah, if one goes, the other comes with it.
Yeah, chunk I think is literally just chunking data. It's literally just breaking up into chunks.
A little bit like itertools.
Yeah, I think so, if I remember correctly.
It's a format to distribute files used by mailboxes or so, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. I will let Christian talk about crypt.
Yeah, crypt is a binding to the ellipses crypt function is used for password hashing. Password hashing, the way around. The problem with that is that the only guaranteed algorithm that's available is Horrible, and if you need some of the better ones, they're probably not available in your libc. So there's like optional algorithms for password hashing, and even they are problematic. So use one of these replacement ones. So
they're much better. Bcrypt or passlib or anything else that's doing it right. Mhm.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah, and the image shader is just a very limited approach to detect if you have a PNG, GIF, JPEG, whatever, based on the first couple of bytes of a file. It's just the same with audio headers, sound headers. They just detect file formats, but they only support a very limited set of file formats, and there are better libraries that are more efficient and support much more different file formats.
Yeah. So after image headers, MSIlib, which helps with Windows MSI installers. Okay, why do we have this in standard library kind of question? I think we did originally to help write the installer for Windows and
Right.
use it anymore. So it's not a big deal. We already talked about NNTPlib, NIS. Who still uses NIS?
Sun Yellow Pages.
Yeah, exactly. Do people even know what Sun is anymore? Right, like getting to that point in our lives.
I think it's a synonym for Oracle.
Yeah, exactly. OSS Audio Dev is just a wrapper around an audio library. Once again, does that really belong in the standard library?
Yeah, it was used by Linux before they had ALSA, before they had Pulse Audio and Pipewire. So this is like from the early 2000s.
No. The pipes library more or less got replaced by subprocess, so it's literally just Unix pipes. SMTPD, I don't think we need to be able to run a server to send email in Python, standard library. So that's why that's there.
Yeah, and there's a PyPI alternatives.
Yeah. Send header, Christian already talked about. SPWD
is the binding to the etc shadow file. So that's the place where Linux actually keeps the passwords for users. But that's the wrong approach. So if you want to log in a user, you don't check the password. You ask the PAM stack if the user is allowed to log into a service. And yeah, Sun AU is another audio format from Sun. So Telnetlib, yeah, Telnet server.
This was specifically to be a server, not a client of Telnet.
It's not a client library. Sorry, yeah, the client library. So I don't think you have a server, but actually I would have to open the code and read the code. UU, that was used by UUCP, so Unix to Unix copy. It's a chunking format to transfer binary data. XDRlib, another Sun library, that is the binary format used by NFS and remote procedure calls. If you have like Sun remote procedure calls.
Right.
For
wow.
Network file servers.
From 1992, indeed. There's an interesting high frequency of Sun being mentioned here.
Yeah, I mean, Python used to run cleanly on Solaris right out of the box.
Yeah, and Sun developed lots of internet standards we still use these days.
Sure.
So hopefully all the listeners were shocked at and had no clue any of these modules existed, and hence why we're getting rid of them.
Where's the threatened list? It's down here somewhere. The modules to keep.
Yes.
So we got ColorSys, file input, get opt parse, and wave. Those are the ones that avoided being cut.
Mm-hmm. ColorSys, to be frank, is just basic math. It's nothing special, but core dev said I use it, I'll keep it around. I'll maintain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like parsing RGB color.
Yeah. File imp. I don't remember about file input. I think someone just said I use it. Get opt and opt parse, where once again, is it worth getting rid of versus aug parse? And is it widely used enough? And it was just one of these. There's just too much code out there right now to warrant ripping it out. So we just said it's easier to keep. And Wave plays WAV sound files. And basically, it's used by education. It's a quick and cheap tool to show kids computers can do fancy stuff like make noise.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
so,
that's actually really nice. If you've got your turtle moving along, it could laugh when it gets to the end of its little thing or whatever, right?
Yeah. But I mean, that's another good point, Michael. Like, oh, turtle. Well, that relies on us shipping TK enter, which requires us shipping tickle TK. And it's just like,
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line? I mean,
But it's turtles all the way down. You know that.
hey, and as someone who learned Turtle back on an Apple IIe with a good old green and black screen, like I totally get it. But
I do
mean,
too.
These are the questions we're starting to ask ourselves, right? Like, where's the line?
Yeah, indeed. All right, before we run out of time, let's have a broader philosophical conversation about this stuff. You said you have a big plan. You know, one of the things that I think is interesting about Python is where it runs in all these different places. I mean, you've got Mac, Windows, Linux, but you also got Raspberry Pis, you've got helicopters, you've got robots, and then you even have, you know, Circuit Python and MicroPython, where it's like really, really small. And I do think it would be interesting to say, here is a subset, a portion of Python and a portion of maybe even the language syntax that if you program to this, you're guaranteed to be able to run it everywhere. Right? Is there a way to agree? Maybe that compiles to WebAssembly and runs in the front end on a browser, or who knows?
So for any of you who read my blog, you'll know I've been doing a long-running blog post series on the syntactic sugar of Python. And part of the reason I've been doing that is and you'll find out more when I write the concluding the post about this, but basically I've been trying to figure out what I've mentally been calling the minimum viable Python. What is the core set of Python constructs that must exist to basically reconstitute all the other parts of Python in its syntax? And kind of, if we were to start from scratch almost,
right,
what would that look like? Now, that's interesting from a language level, but from a standard library level, that comes into play only in terms of support, right? Like, if we drop this feature, would that break things, right? Like
well, for example, does tk-enter need to be in the WebAssembly front-end version? Probably not, right? I guess not, but you know, maybe. Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky question, right? It's always one of these things of who are you optimizing for? Who's the target audience? How do you define that, right? Like other than stuff that we have to have just to make CPython run, nothing technically has to be in there.
Yeah.
Right? Some have said, oh, we should have enough to at least bootstrap in pip. So that if you can at least get pip or some installer in, you can then at least get yourself going and start installing dependencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as you mentioned earlier, like it's nice to be able to also write that little automation script that helps maintain your system and not have to pull anything and have to create a virtual environment for every little script you ever write.
When I install Python on Linux on just like a bare server, I can apt install Python 3, but maybe that's not enough. Maybe I need to also install sometimes Python 3-VE&V, or you know, it's like broken up into bits, right?
The Debian question is a very hot topic with Christian in the room. But I personally argue against Debian's policy on that and say Venv would be considered a core part, right?
I think it's core as well. And I wasn't so much picking on Venv as just like there are environments where it comes in pieces to some degree, like that.
Or there's an environment.
What do you want to say about this? Yeah, like.
So this is okay. I need to find the right words to not get into trouble again, or to get into. Last time I was a bit uncareful. Somebody accused me to wage a crusade against Debian. So,
it's a philosophical disagreement, basically.
Yeah. So Debian has the policies to split packages in smaller parts so they can have a minimal installation. And they also don't like the way how we have like virtual env and surepip provided, because it's actually duplicating code. We have like a zip file or binary wheels with compressed setup tools and pip, which contains vendor packages, but Debian wants to use their own distribution provided version of pip. So this is a conflict. And like we from the parts of the core developers, we think that the usability is more important here. So we want users to be able to use standard documentation and instructions to use Python install extensions. This is more important for us. And this is a debate which had like multiple sessions between Debian engineers and the steering council. There was several heated discussions. And yeah, there are just different philosophical like interactions.
So, I mean, the key point is there are a lot of questions about, like, if you start to slice and dice the standard library into parts that you can install in groupings, for instance, is that truly part of the standard library, or is that just an optional install on PyPI that the core dev team just happens to maintain, right? Because you can no longer rely on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you went down that path, it would almost be a little bit like the Anaconda story, right? Like, here's the essence of what I got, but if I install what I normally install, I get more. There'd be like a minimum install and like a fuller install, which I don't know how I feel about that. But
well, for some parts
on the front end, I'd have to write JavaScript. I feel pretty good about it. I'm starting to think. I don't know.
At least for some part, it makes kind of sense. So let's go back to Tkinter. So Tkinter depends on TickleTK, which depends on your graphical user interface. So X11. And if Python would always require TickleTK, then you would have to install, I guess, like 100 megabytes of libraries on every container image that has Python, because the whole X11 stack is very big. So you get your whole like graphical user interface libraries down to the actual graphical server that renders all the output. So it makes sense that most Linux distros split up Tkinter and ship it as an optional package. But some distros go a bit further and split off packages that we consider to be core packages. So the inner core that should be always available and
like
working.
Datetime and tuples and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah. It's stuff that has no third-party dependencies, basically.
Okay. Interesting. What about WebAssembly? You guys started actually building for WebAssembly, didn't you? I feel like
yes.
Steve Dower pointed out that I don't remember the way to look it up super easy, but that there's sort of a proper core dev version of WebAssembly CPython now.
It's REPL Ethan HS.me. I just posted in the chat with the chat window.
Basically what happened was at the core dev sprints back in October, I started to look at seeing what it would take to compile CPython to WebAssembly. And I was lamenting in our build channel on our core dev Discord server that, all right, the build setup was kind of old and creaky, and I needed some help to figure out what to do. And then Christian, working for a Linux distribution, knows how all this stuff works. And so he started answering my questions, and then I did some initial cleanup. And then Christian really got into it and just really started to clean up our entire build process in terms of modules and such. Because there's a setup file in the repo where you can specify what modules you do or don't want built in to Python, both compiled it all into like a .so or DLL, compiled statically into the binary, or just completely left out. And Christian went through with some help with Erland, I think, actually, and cleaned up a bunch of the whole structure so that we were using more of PKG config and just made it just a bit more modern. And while he was doing that, Christian would bring up stuff about like cross compilation, because that's another thing we do is you do a cross build, right? You can build, I mean, you could totally build on your Mac right now, Michael, 4x86 64-bit, even though you're running an M1.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right? So it's just flags.
That's
to the
pretty
compiler.
wild, yeah.
But the way you get WebAssembly building that way is you just specify typically in Scriptin as a C compiler, which basically is Clang, and you just specify it. And basically under the hood, it's more or less just specifying the right flags and everything to just make Clang build for a different CPU target. And then Christian was starting to talk about like, oh, well, for cross builds, could we do this and that? And I kept saying, no, it won't work for WebAssembly because of this, and it won't work for WebAssembly because of that. And then Christian just looked into it and was like, oh, I'll use this as a motivator. And then Christian just ran with it. And Christian figured out all the problems and just got really into it. And it's been patching CPython's main over and over to the point that as of, I don't know, less than a month ago.
So for 2 weeks now, we can run the entire test suite without any failures.
On WebAssembly.
Yep. clean
Inside Node.js. So you compile so we said a bit earlier. So when you build Python for WebAssembly, you have to not only target WebAssembly, but also like the runtime. So these things are called triplets, so platform triplets. So you have like which CPU you target, which vendor and operating system, and additional flags like glibc. And the default target is a Wesm32 mscripton. So you do compile to WebAssembly the CPU instruction for 32 bits, and mscripton is the runtime platform. And mscripton can target multiple like different platforms. So this is mscripton for the browser, but you can also compile it that it uses Node.js backends and Node.js like file system access. So we can actually
I have more permissions and more capabilities, right?
You can run threads, you can run sockets in a limited way, and you can access the file system. And so it was a process of running the test suite, figuring out why it's crashing. So we had in the beginning like this completely like really crashing the runtime. So not just itself, but there's like a virtual kernel layer written in JavaScript that provides syscalls written in JavaScript to the WebAssembly module. It's a bit weird. So I was writing kernel-like code in JavaScript and the unit test code for that in C. So
it's very cool. Yeah. So this REPL.ethanhs.me, which I'll put in the show notes. It's got my mscripton version of Python 3.11, and I can do fstring stuff, and the thing that's right here in the browser.
Hasn't been updated in a while. It's a bit old.
Need to talk to Ethan. It's like 6 weeks old. That's old for the web, I guess.
Well, I mean, we have a cron job running on Ethan's GitHub repo for this that runs nightly against Python, CPython itself, to make sure it continues to compile. We need to get a build bot going. Microsoft has agreed to fund one via Azure, and we have to get it to. I haven't talked to Christian about it yet, but we'll figure out getting a build bot going, and then part of one of Brett's crazy grand plans around Python and WebAssembly is we're defining official platform support for CPython right now in PEP 11. And my hope is we're going to get it so that Christian and I are listed as the maintainers of the WebAssembly support in CPython, and we'll get it listed as an official tier 2, what we're calling tier 2 supported platform, which basically means it's backed by 2 core devs at least and a build bot, with the idea that tier 1 is something the entire core team supports and is based on continuous integration. But one of the funny things, one of the actually nice things about WebAssembly is we could theoretically even get that to a tier 1, because WebAssembly is an abstracted assembly language, but it's not CPU dependent. So we could actually compile it on GitHub Actions and test on that just as equally as Mac, Windows, or Linux, and have it still be fully tested and work on CI. And I mean, you can take this idea really far, right? Like suddenly we could start having executable code examples in the documentation for Python, because we've got a runtime now.
And you don't have to worry about security or compute costs, because
it's in your browser
yourself, and it's your compute.
All right. Selfishly for me at work, when this works, I can start talking about shipping the Node version of this with the Python extension for VS Code, or as its own extension. So like you don't have Python installed, install this other extension that's going to come with Python compiled to WebAssembly, and you'll just have it. Or VS Code.dev browser version. Like we could potentially start shipping that with VS Code.dev and have the Python extension pull that in, and now you'll even have a runtime in the browser that ties into what I think is a nice editor. So there's a lot of possibilities here that we really hope to get going with. And then when you start talking about WASI, right? Then you start to get to edge compute. Christian just got that working, like literally, I think last week. I don't know where it stands yet, but
working again. So the first version was like hacking and patching lots of things out.
Oh yeah,
And
all the
the new
Yeah.
version, like a week ago, was using a library from a company is also working on Python support, and they had like stubs and hacks to
Single store labs, right?
single source labs. Yep. So Vazi is even more restricted and limited compared to version MScript then. So you don't have any support like for threading, but you can't compile Python without at least the threading library headers, and they just had like workarounds for that too. So you can't spawn a spread. So if you try to start a thread, will just fail. But at least you have enough like of the C API available to compile Python little bits and pieces. And
that's super exciting.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, it's not a completely new effort. There's actually a productive version of Python for WebAssembly in the browser called Pyodide.
Yeah.
And which is also now used by Jupyter Lite. So Jupyter Lite is Jupyter Notebooks on top of Pyodide. And that's working
Jupyter
very
Lite's
well.
looking really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually met with the Pyodide team, and more or less what we came to an agreement, seems a little weird to phrase it this way, but basically an agreement where we will keep trying to make it so that the main branch in CPython can compile cleanly to WebAssembly, and that frees them to focus on a JavaScript API to tie into it and on getting the scientific stack compiled over to WebAssembly, because you have to do some
compile like matplotlib and stuff because it's got C in it, so you got to compile it over there. Or I don't know, but some of those like NumPy definitely does.
Exactly, because traditionally they had to do all the patches and all the work every Python release to get it working, and Christian and I are just in a better position to be able to keep that up and going. So we just said, let us handle that part. You don't have to worry about patching that anymore, and you can focus on the stuff that's more unique to WebAssembly and what you're able to be good at over there. So that's kind of where we're divvying up the workload here. Is we're just going to keep main working, and then they get to stop worrying about that once they start worrying about Python 3.11.
Yeah. So cool. One of the first things that Ethan and I did, we took the patch stats that were developed by Pyodide developers and adjusted them and made them compatible so we could actually merge them and have them in the upstream code. So lots of their patches was just replacing things, but not in a way that would work if you would build the same source code for the standard Python. So they're just hacking around and getting things working, which is totally okay for their approach, but we couldn't just take their pull requests and their
they had a much narrower
so we had to make them in a way that would work for standard Python and WebAssembly Python.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, two things spring to mind for me when I hear this. One is, does this mean I could write Electron apps and just have the slightest shim that then just lets me run like a backend in Python, the sort of Node.js side of that in Python, which would be awesome.
It should, because Electron ships with Node. So as long as you're back to
you just get the Node version, and you just get it on top of there, and then instead of writing all your sort of core logic of your app,
you'll have to shim out back to JavaScript appropriately and have those APIs, which you might want Pyodide for potentially. But basically, yes, that door is open.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know Electron.js well enough to say, oh, I could totally just go do that. But I see that as a possibility that would be awesome.
Yeah, so what we don't have, probably won't add in the near future, is any kind of bindings to JavaScript. So you can run like Python in the web browser as like an isolated process or web worker, but communication back and forth between like the outside world in the Node.js or browser world and Python, that's provided by Pyodide, but we don't have that.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a very fun and great talk by Katie Bell. She also helped us to kickstart the port. She gave a talk at PyCon AU a couple of months ago. It was like 10 minutes introduction, 2 minutes compiling Python to WebAssembly, and 28 minutes get std-in working. So just the std-in, std-out working took like half an hour of her talk, because that's surprisingly hard with WebAssembly.
Yeah. We kind of made the decision that, at least for now, we are not interested in trying to develop that FFI back and forth with JavaScript and having that opinionated API. And that's as I said, kind of the agreement we've come up with PyDad right now is they already have an API. We're going to lean on them to provide that for now, at least, and probably will continuously. I don't really necessarily see us changing this. And we'll just provide the lower level functionality of just the runtime.
Right. Yeah. But if you all build that, it's a great foundation for other people to run with.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the other one, but first of all, is this the talk that you're talking about?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. Okay.
That's Katie.
That's Katie's talk. Great. I'll put that in the show notes. The other one is, that's the right URL.
Yes.
Is this Blazor project from the C#.NET team?
Yep.
This is .NET, the .NET runtime, as a front-end framework running in the browser, which is pretty awesome. And it seems like there's just so many parallels that could be brought to the Python world that, like, you don't have to do Angular. You can just do PyBlazor. I mean, that's not the name, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's closer to possible. And I think this is actually something that would be really neat.
Yes. The trick here, and I think Blazor does the same thing right now as well, is, from my understanding, Blazor has a WebAssembly compiled .NET runtime that gets loaded into the client.
Yeah.
And then that's how it does the execution, if I understand how Blazor works correctly. And so you could do a theoretical same thing with Python. Now, obviously, there is size issues to consider here, right? Like, this is not something you necessarily on a really slow connection somewhere would want to necessarily pull down, because I think the runtime, is it 5 megs now, Christian, or is it 3?
So the uncompressed WASM is like 6 megabytes, gets down to like 4, and then you have the big bundle, the data file that contains the Python compiled files. That's another 5 or 6 MB. So you, it's big, but actually it's smaller. Okay, 3 MB. Can you scroll up a bit? The .data file. It's the standard library.
Did I hear? Hold on.
Yeah, the network tab. And it's Python data and Python WASM. So yeah, so
it's 3 megs for the standard library, 212 kilobytes for the wrapper, and you've already cached the WASM, so it's probably
I got it.
like 6 MB.
So
But we can probably make it a bit smaller. So currently that comes like with elementary and decimal model and all the hashing libraries compiled in. So we currently create one gigantic binary. There are ways to have side models like shared libraries with WASM. It's a bit more complicated to get that right. And also it increases the size of the main binary, the main model a bit. Didn't go into that yet. That's something I will look into maybe in the future.
But as you were talking about earlier, Michael, about like slicing and dicing the standard library, if you're shipping the runtime, you can also shrink that down by just dropping all the parts of the standard library you don't need. Right. So if you run like Module Finder or some other script that's going to go through the standard library to figure out what you do and don't need, you could actually just compile your own version of CPython for WebAssembly only with the standard library that you want.
Interesting. You get it really small, right? So which of these three, Python.js, Python data, and Python.wasm has ceval.c in it?
WASM.
The WASM file.
WASM one. Okay, so that's 2 megs and then plus the standard library bits, right?
Yep. So it's a little over 5 megs in total for everything.
Yeah.
Which isn't huge. Is an intranet project that you might need, or totally fine for Electron apps.
It's fine. It would be totally fine for a single page app. It'd be fine for Gmail.
Yeah, it's something you're going to leave up and running constantly and not change. Yeah, it's within the realm of probably what Facebook's already downloading onto your machine right now anyway.
Yeah.
So
just run an ad blocker and you'll do less. No, all right, I think we are well over time, but you guys, it's always great to talk to you. Yeah, good work. I dream of PyBlazor happening, and I also saw a nice, interesting comment that triggered a thought. It's progressive web apps are not really a thing we can do in Python very well, because for a progressive web app, it's really got to be all offline in some meaningful way. But if you could bring Python.wasm down, maybe use local DB, there might be some really interesting ways that progressive web apps become way more interesting to us as Python web developers?
Okay, now I have to confess I have no clue what a progressive web app is. I don't know anything about actual web development. So I got Python working on the browser, but I don't know how browsers work.
Awesome.
I will
No,
give
that's
one
great.
last tease though, Michael. I had two motivations for getting into this whole WebAssembly thing: browser, mobile, because every phone has a WebAssembly runtime thanks to all of them shipping with the browser.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm also very interested. I would rather have a mobile option than a front end web option. So there we have it. Although these may well go together, honestly. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both for your hard work on this PEP, and then it's super interesting to see how it kind of ties back into this like more focused runtimes in more places. Yeah. All right. Before you get out of here, really quick, last question I'm going to ask you. I'll just keep to one, since I kind of know the answers for the other, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, notable PyPI package you want to give a shout out to before we dip?
Oh man.
There's one that runs WebAssembly, like something you can have like Python that'll basically let you interoperate with any WebAssembly one. I can't remember quite what that was called though.
I think Wasm Time has one.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a couple. There's a couple of people who've posted stuff to PyPI that let you load WebAssembly code and actually run them. And I think Wasm Time might be one of them. Wasm Time is a WebAssembly runtime run by the Bytecode Alliance, and it's usually the most cutting edge of all of them. So if anyone wants to play with this and looking for a runtime, Wasm Time is probably a good one. But yeah, it looks like they also have a
Wasm Time.
There's a Python plugin, yeah.
And you can ask Christian what his favorite editor is.
Yeah.
The right one. The good one. I've
go ahead.
used a couple. So I use
tell us about the editor.
I use VS Code, I use Vim. So depending on my needs.
Yeah, you got a whole survey, the whole spectrum there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And then notable package you want to give a quick shout out to before we get out of here?
It's very late. I don't know.
No, the Python standard library.
Yeah.
The lack of certain things in the standard library. It's like an anti module. The fact that you guys are taking them out, right?
Oh, the anti-gravity model was also fun.
Oh yeah, sure. All right, anti-gravity. Pip install anti-gravity. Now,
no, it's in the standard library.
I'm going to give you all up here on the WebAssembly one.
That would not work. I removed that.
Oh, no module.
Because that requires the browser model, which requires the
I'm in a browser
sub-process. So you can't run any processes. So that's
I know. I'm just teasing. I tried, for people to say, I tried to import anti-gravity inside the WASM REPL. It didn't do it.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I wonder if PyDI can do it.
Yeah, I don't know. It maybe can. It should. They all should. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to see this progressing. I see it leading to good places.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
Yeah, you bet. Bye.
Bye-bye. See ya.